What would your response be? Because there are critics out there with regard to incentives, and that, and Tesla has been, and I can speak from experience, the beneficiary of incentives, economic incentives, with regard to the Gigafactory.
Sure.
What would you tell those people?
Yeah, I think, well, first of all, as you know, those incentives were a little overstated. In the case of the Gigafactory, it's a $5 billion investment, capital investment, to get that factory going. And I didn't actually know this until, by the way, I didn't know this until we did the press conference. Actually, that over 20 years, the Nevada incentives added up to $1.3 billion. I actually didn't even know this. But it's,
now he's telling me. Go ahead.
Literally, I learned it at the press conference. I'm like, really? No, but I mean, the thing is that they took what added up over 20 years and made it sound like Nevada was writing us a $1.3 billion check. And I'm still waiting for that check. Did it get lost in the mail? I don't know. But this is the way the press works, of course. Now if you divide 1.3 billion by 20, okay, then it's like, okay, Tesla's on average receives sort of a tax. It's basically sales and use tax abatement is what it amounts to. So Tesla gets we get on the order of 50 to 60 million of sales and use tax abatement divided over 20 years. But this is for something which has a $5 billion capital cost just to get going, and then it would have to generate about $100 billion over that period of time to achieve a $1.3 billion tax benefit. So essentially, it's a little over 1% over that period of time, and that's great, okay? But it's not, it's not the way it was characterized in the press. Because if it's put in the proper context, it sounds like, okay, well, that's neat, It's about 5% helpful on setting up the factory and about 1% helpful over the next 20 years. Cool. That actually sounds pretty reasonable.
Yeah.
So that was helpful, but there are a lot of other factors as well. We actually had slightly bigger incentive packages from some other states that were offered, but we factored in how quickly could we get the Gigafactory into operation, what were the risks associated with that progress, what would be the logistics costs over time of transferring battery packs and powertrains to a vehicle factory in California, and all of those factors weighed together is what led us to make the decision in favor of Nevada. And working with your team was great. It was very forward-leaning. A big part was also just like making sure you feel really welcome, within a state. That's sort of what led us to make the decision for the Gigafactory, and then we have another factory in New York doing solar panels. Which also will be the biggest solar panel producer in North America when it's done. And then we expect to establish probably at least 2 or 3 more gigafactories in the U.S. in the next several years, as well as a couple overseas. But the overall objective of Tesla is really what set of actions can we take to accelerate the advent of sustainable production and consumption of energy. I think the sort of the way I would assess the historic good of Tesla is in terms of how many years of acceleration was it, and if we can accelerate sustainable energy by 10 years, I would consider that to be a great success. even if it was only 5 years, that would still be pretty good. That's the overarching optimization.
So you've talked about interplanetary travel and sustainable energy and the vehicles a little bit. What would you want things to look like in 5 to 10 years associated with energy and with autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles?
Well, I think things are going to grow exponentially. So there's a big difference between 5 and 10 years. My guess is, probably in 10 years, more than a half of new vehicle production is electric in the United States. And China's probably going to be ahead of that because China's been super pro-EV. I don't think a lot of people know this, but China's environmental policies are way ahead of the U.S. Like their mandate for renewable energy far exceeds the U.S. I think sometimes people are under the impression that China is either dragging their feet or somehow behind the U.S. in terms of sustainable energy promotion, but they're by far the most aggressive on Earth. It's crazy. In fact, a coalition of Chinese car manufacturers just wrote the Chinese government to beg for them to slow down the mandate because it's like too much. They need to make 8% electric vehicles, I think, like next year or in 2 years or something. They can't physically do it. So China's by far the most aggressive on electric vehicles and solar. But that's a common misperception that they're not. There's one Google search away to figure this out, by the way. It's really pretty easy. So, and in 10 years, man, I think, so half of all production, I think, will be EV. I think almost all cars produced will be autonomous in 10 years. Almost all. It will be rare to find one that is not in 10 years. That's going to be a huge transformation. Now, the thing to bear in mind, though, is that new vehicle production is only about 5% the size of the vehicle fleet. So you think about how long does a car or truck last? And they last 15 to 20 years. So before they're finally scrapped. So new vehicle production is only roughly at most 1/15 of the fleet size. So even when new vehicle production, say, switches over to electric or to autonomous, that still means the vast majority of the fleet on the roads is not. It'll take another, 5 to 10 years before that becomes the majority of the fleet becomes EV or autonomous. But if you were to say go out 20 years, overwhelmingly, things are electric, autonomous, overwhelmingly.
Fully autonomous?
Fully autonomous.
So no one will have to touch the steering wheel if there is one?
There will not be a steering wheel. In 20 years, it will be like having a horse. People have horses, which is cool. But
So having a regular car will be like having a horse. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, yeah. And there will be people that have non-autonomous cars, like people have horses. It just would be unusual to use that as a mode of transport.
Yes. All right.